We can begin? Yes. Good morning. Better afternoon. Yes, so let me introduce Jonathan Goodman from Linden Lab, based in San Francisco, making Second Life. And Jonathan is first time in Europe. He visited Vienna. Now he is in Prague, and they transfer to London, to United Kingdom. Jonathan will talk about Metaverse origin, about future of Metaverse, about connection of Metaverse and three-dimensional web. Please. And another thing, please.
Thank you everyone for attending. So I guess we'll jump right into kind of introductions here. I'm Jonathan Goodman. I've been in the Metaverse space for about 15 years now as both a content consumer, producer, and developer of the Metaverse. I've worked at Linden Lab both as an open source contributor and as an actual employee of Linden Lab most recently. I've worked for a good few startups in the space, most of which haven't really made it since the original Metaverse boom back in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And I've worked for Magic Leap, Facebook Reality Labs, and, Linden. So in terms of my contributions in the space, I've created open source Second Life third-party viewers, namely the Exodus Second Life third-party viewer back in 2011. In 2012, I created one of the bigger open source contributions to Second Life and the Second Life Materials project, which basically brought modern tooling to Second Life for content creators and so on. I've done multiple Metaverse projects ranging across business to business sort of Metaverse projects in terms of like giving people a space to kind of like cut out expensive travel across the world, reduce emissions, and being able to showcase virtual products and so on within a 3D world. I've also done some stuff at Magic Leap, working on the C3 project. C3 stands for Communication, Co-Presence, and Collaboration. The basic premise behind C3 was to have a session by which users could join using an augmented reality headset, both remotely and physically, and be able to share applications that everyone could use within that space collaboratively. I've also worked on the Neos Metaverse project as a graphics programmer. So jumping right in, let's talk about the internet, the original Metaverse. So before we really jump super into that, a few things to consider. There's a bit of history here. So back in 1969, ARPANET was established by the United States Department of Defense to go through and connect computers together and enable remote access to other machines on a computer network. In 1983, the multiple telecommunications companies come together to form the internet. Basically, these different networks connecting together to enable remote access to computers across countries, borders, oceans, you name it. In 1991, HTTP, the Hypertext Transmission Protocol, is invented at CERN, and this would basically lay one of the most fundamental technologies for the internet as we know it today. In 1992, Snow Crash is released by the author Neal Stephenson. Snow Crash describes probably the first concept of the metaverse known in literature today. His metaverse describes something called the street, basically a very long street with virtual real estate, virtual experiences, social experiences, and so on in a very dystopian sort of world where people escape their realities to go into a virtual reality where they can do anything that they can think of, anything that they want to do there. They have the concept of virtual property rights, virtual ownership, commerce, the whole 9 yards. Basically a sort of realm that lives adjacent to ours. 1991 through 1995, the World Wide Web starts to grow and starts to explode. And that kind of set the scene for a lot of things later on in the 2000s. 2003, Second Life is released. Second Life kind of was a turning point in terms of metaverse. Like, really, it started to give us an idea of, well, what if we actually built what Neil Stephenson described in his book? Like, what if we got somewhere close to this? Like, we have virtual real estate, we have the concept of digital ownership, we have an economy, we have marketplaces, so on, right? 2004, Web 2.0 is popularized. Now, Web 2.0 as a phrase has existed since, I want to say, about 1999, somewhere around there, 1999, 2000. But it wasn't really fully popularized until 2004, thanks to O'Reilly Media. Web 2.0 kind of focused on user-generated content and more interactivity with the web as we know it today, which would kind of give birth to the smartphone generation and now the virtual reality generation. Apps, pretty much the whole 9 yards here as far as what we know as the internet today. Then in the late 2000s, we had the first metaverse boom. Now, I know there's a lot of talk about metaverse today because a very big social media company renamed to Meta, but this isn't our first metaverse boom. The first one really came in the late 2000s, around 2008, 2009, going up until the early 2010s. Everyone trying to reproduce that runaway success that was Second Life and trying to kind of see if that was lightning in a bottle, so to speak, or if we can actually build a metaverse, like this massive sort of successor to the internet. Well, unfortunately, many of those startups just didn't make it. And for a long time, Second Life was the platform in terms of the metaverse and what you could do there. So this all kind of comes to the question of, is the internet really the metaverse? Well, considering what Neil Stephenson really wrote about in his book, there's a few particular things that you can kind of break the metaverse down into. On the left side, we have more or less what you could do in Neil Stephenson's metaverse. And on the right, we have what you can do on the internet that fits, that kind of describes a lot of these things. You have social activities. You have social media, discussion boards, instant messaging. I'm sure we've all participated in all this. Commerce, Amazon, eBay, pretty much any website that can sell you something, whether that's digital or physical, you can do that today. Avatars, profile pictures, 3D avatars. Sometimes these don't quite fall under the same definition of avatar that Neil Stephenson was using in his book. Of course, in Neil's literature, everyone has a 3D representation of themselves. But I'd still argue a profile picture qualifies as an avatar. Entertainment, online video games, streaming video, you name it. You can find some form of entertainment. Heck, many of us have probably looked at social media and found some entertainment there in the social discourse. Persistence, Internet Archive. So if you create a website, it's picked up by the Internet Archive. It's there pretty much until the Internet Archive goes away, which is somewhat unlikely. Anything that has a database that has some level of persistence in terms of how you interact with the website or application for that matter. So we've achieved persistence. Digital ownership, buying a movie, any sort of 3D asset. We have the concept of owning something on the internet today. And then, of course, visual representation, or going through and seeing the internet or the metaverse. We have that again today with web browsers, applications, and so on. So this kind of begs the question, is like, what even is a metaverse if we've gotten there? Like, I mean, how do we answer this, right? If we've been living in it and we have something vaguely resembling it, what's the metaverse today? Well, it's very simple, actually. It's one of these. I'm sure we all know what this is, right? It's a bridge. Yeah. So what does that mean? Well, it's the bridge between our reality and the digital world, the internet, basically. So to kind of go further into that, since we have virtual worlds as something of an attribute of a metaverse, is the metaverse a virtual world platform like Second Life? Is it a massively multiplayer online game? Is it World of Warcraft? Well, funny answer is yes, as in yes, and also no. I'll explain. Although a virtual world can be classified as an attribute of a metaverse, a virtual world is not necessarily a metaverse. And an MMOG may be a metaverse or part of it. In fact, I work on Neos as well, where you can have an MMOG that's built inside of Neos, but Neos is the ultimate metaverse that you build it inside of, and many people would consider Neos an MMOG. So that's one example of where sometimes the lines get really blurred. So in this regard, you can kind of think of metaverse as a collection of technologies, basically, to build this bridge that other people can use for their applications, for their virtual experiences, across the board. So let's go to some things, some examples of what is and is not a metaverse. Let's talk about what is first. Second Life, of course, Neos, Roblox, funnily enough, they've actually done a lot of work in this regard to try and become a metaverse. Sure, their demographic is far younger than most people who would use these sorts of things, and they're definitely changing their demographic as that demographic gets older. But definitely, you can do a lot of things there that looks like something you could do in a metaverse. Meta, of course, although they may not fit what a lot of people consider to be a metaverse, they still are providing a lot of the fundamental things that metaverse should have. Well, let's talk about what isn't. World of Warcraft. It's not a metaverse, it's a video game. It's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. TinyMuck, basically an old text application where you can role-play with other people and so on and so forth. Born back in the 80s, early 90s. Yeah, that's not a metaverse. Lacks a lot of attributes as far as what a metaverse should have. Final Fantasy XIV falls under the same category as World of Warcraft. It's just an online role-playing game. VRChat is at the end of this list with their asterisk next to it because it lacks certain elements that a metaverse would have or should have, but that's just today. They're certainly working on additional things to kind of get there. One of these days, they'll probably be on the left side of this list. So let's kind of talk about what these metaverses have in common, like what makes them so special, right? Well, first things first, we have commerce. Big deal. Going through and being able to pay someone for goods and services, whether that's person to person, through a marketplace, whatever. So long as commerce is there, you're a step towards a metaverse in a lot of regards. We also have digital ownership, the concept of owning something within a metaverse, whether that's a 3D asset or a title to some land or what have you. We have a concept of digital ownership. We also have virtual worlds. That's kind of a given theme when it comes down to metaverses nowadays. 3D doesn't even necessarily have to be 3D. It can also be 2D. We have a space that kind of connects all these things together that people can coexist in. We have user-generated content. This is actually perhaps one of the biggest items on here. Web 2.0 really said user-generated content, this is important and is central to the web going forward. And in Metaverse, this is very much a very big deal. People should be able to create what they can think of, basically. May not always be good, may not always be bad. But this is still a fundamental concept when it comes down to Metaverse at the end of the day. Also, no restrictions on connectivity to external services. So this is actually another important one. If you go through and you have a virtual world, and you tell me that you can only talk to things in this virtual world, well, you're not the metaverse. You just created a small siloed world here. Whenever you go through and open that up, I can talk to, say, I don't know, Google from my virtual world. Or let's take this a step further. Let's say I wanted to kind of go back to that bridge and say, talk to real world services. Like, say I want to order my groceries inside of the VR headset. I know it sounds funny today, but it's still something that is possible within a metaverse because I can talk to these services. I have the tools to go through and build applications and experiences that enable me to do any number of things that can bridge the virtual reality with the physical reality. That's a pretty important aspect to the metaverse. And it tends to read more as a game engine or operating system than game. Now, what does that mean? Well, Neos is a great example of more or less a game engine. yes, people say, oh, well, that's a really interesting game. But a lot of people frequently characterize it as kind of like a collaborative Unity game engine. For those of you unfamiliar, Unity is a very popular game engine that a lot of people use across the world. And with how Neos works, you're able to basically leverage the engine to its maximum in a collaborative means with multiple people. Another example of this is kind of going to the operating system point is Meta. We have the Oculus headsets, which have their own operating system. They have their own storefronts. They have their own virtual world. You can have collaboration, or you can just kind of live in your own little reality. There's a lot of kind of things in between here. Second Life is a little bit closer to game, still closer to game engine than game, though. And Roblox is kind of in the same category as Second Life in this regard. So let's talk about VR and AR here as well. So virtual reality and augmented reality are ultimately tools to convey the metaverse. They're not necessary, at least not by today's understanding of metaverse. Certainly in Neil's book, VR was kind of like the big thing. You go through and the intention is that you're escaping our physical reality into a virtual one. But thanks to Second Life and Roblox and a few other examples here and there, that definition shifted a little bit. After all, accessibility to the metaverse is going to be key in terms of its adoption. So we need to be able to consider every possible way to access the metaverse. We can go from AR glasses that maybe someday could fit this form factor, or your cell phone, for example. So let's talk a little bit more about that bridge. Like, if we have this bridge and we have these technologies, what can we actually do with them? Or what can we do with them in the future? Well, let's talk about what we can do today. Here's some examples. Trying to connect the realms here, we can go through and control and monitor smart devices, smart infrastructure, things like that through a metaverse. We can go through and interact with real-world services. Dell Technologies actually had a very interesting use case for this on Second Life a while back. On Second Life, they had a region where users could go to, configure a computer, use Second Life's virtual currency to purchase the computer that they had configured, and have it shipped to their own home, all within the metaverse. Virtually exploring real-world locations. This is actually another interesting one. A few weeks back, I was at a friend's house. This friend he works on amusement rides and stuff like that for some very big companies that we've all heard of. And so he has access to a lot of different kinds of hardware that most people wouldn't. What he did, oh, another fun fact, he lives in a geodesic dome. Sounds like a really interesting guy. We took some projectors. We projected Neos onto the geodesic dome. We invited people to join it. We had microphones and speakers set up so that people who are in this physical location could interact with these people through the metaverse. To me, that's pretty cool. And it even goes further. We can even go through and set up, say, displays in certain physical locations with cameras and so on, so people in the real world can go up and see kind of like a virtual mirror of the environment that they're in with people who are exploring that area virtually. This isn't science fiction. We're here today with this. So we've described the bridge, and this is a fun topic, Web 3.0 or Web 3. Is Metaverse Web 3? Is it crypto? Is it blockchain? Is these things Metaverse? Let's kind of discuss that a little bit. So starting from the core premise of Web 3, we have decentralization of the web. Well, Metaverse can be decentralized, sure. Doesn't necessarily make Metaverse Web 3 or the other way around. Blockchains. Oh, that's always a fun topic. Blockchains are really more of a tool, not really Metaverse. Decentralized finance. I mean, yeah, that's an interesting idea for a Metaverse. And of course, we have digital ownership in Web 3. Again, that's really more of a tool. And that kind of begs the question of, is it Metaverse? No, it isn't. It's just a tool of the Metaverse. Yes, you could use Web 3 as a tool. That doesn't necessarily mean that Web 3 is Metaverse or Metaverse is Web 3. So let's get into why. As I mentioned, it's a tool, and it's one of many you can use here. You can have a centralized Metaverse like Second Life, or Roblox for that matter. You can have a peer-to-peer Metaverse like Neos, where many people think that what you are doing is, well, I'm connecting to a server somewhere in the cloud. No, you're connecting to someone else's computer. You're just connecting to another user. There's any number of ways you can do this. Additionally, Web3 lacks many attributes that a metaverse should have. It doesn't have a way to represent itself visually. It's kind of an important thing for the metaverse. It doesn't really have social media or social networking or social experiences. You have to build an app on top of Web3 to achieve this. That's why at the end of the day, fundamentally, Web3 is a tool. So kind of transitioning to our closing here, let's talk about the future of the metaverse. The metaverse is a bridge, and that's really all it should be really conceived as at the end of the day. There will likely never be one metaverse to rule them all, mostly because metaverses have a very different definition depending on who you ask and who's building the platform. Second Life versus Neos. Second Life is closer to Minecraft in terms of how you use it and its accessibility and ease of use, whereas Neos is closer to a straight-up game engine because of the sheer number of developer tools that we provide you with, as one such example. All in all, the future of metaverse, I think, is bright, especially given that we are seeing more adoption of virtual reality. We're starting to see people get more involved into content creation in the space. We're starting to see microeconomies starting to form, along with long-standing macroeconomies in the space, such as Second Life. So yeah, that's basically what Metaverse is. I hope you all enjoyed my talk. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you very much for presentation, for sketching, I think, new way of informatics or one way of informatics. For me, it is way in which we can very easily create narratives, very easily. Better than in neural networks. Neural networks are very fine, but Metaverse is better, I think. It means their integration will be better. So please, if you have any question, Marketa.
Hi, my name is Marketa Gabriel, and I'm with Professor Peter Klan, attending lectures of Neos VR, and I'm more artist than programmer. I'm not really good in programming. I never used logics or anything, so I'm just importing embedded 3D models to the metaverse, and then I try to invite people to see this VR architecture or VR art. But sometimes for me, it's very hard to connect with the community of the people that are already there with other programmers, because I joined some parties and it's like, yeah, it's the metaverse, but I'm kind of alone there, you know, with my model. So I don't know if it's, for me, it's not a game, but you can use it in different ways, like artists or architects just see the 3D models, and then it's maybe not a metaverse because you're not using all the tools that it has, but it's still fun. And I think it's exciting, and also for exhibiting VR models or VR, it's just exciting to have a party, have VR headset and people to see your 3D art. So that's how I'm using it. But like the blockchains and everything, like cryptocurrency, it's just something that I don't
It's something
understand.
else, really.
I don't touch this topic, so yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, like, that actually kind of highlights that, you know, Metaverse, it's not really a game. It's really more going back to, it's a collection of technologies to kind of bridge gaps and things like that. Being able to showcase your art in VR, you know, and being able to sit there with other people and even build it in VR with other people present. You know, that's a pretty powerful, it's a pretty powerful utility of the Metaverse, I would argue. Yeah.
Just a question. What do you think about using NPCs in these kind of works?
NPCs, non-player characters?
Yeah.
I mean, hey, they're actually pretty useful for a lot of different things, and especially like as AI continues to evolve and we start to see some intersections happen here. Imagine being able to like join a world in Neos, for example, and have, you know, a AI controlled NPC help you along, you know, being able to act as a, I wouldn't say smart assistant, but definitely give you some sort of assistance along the way here as you navigate the world. Not to mention, you know, games in the metaverse, because games are definitely a part of the metaverse. Being able to have NPCs they can interact with. Maybe they're the bad guy, maybe they're a good guy, maybe they're a quest giver, right? Definitely, you know, it's an application. So.
Do you think that they'll only take role as a guide or something?
I'm sorry?
Do you think that they can replace like humans, like human players, or they're gonna get some roles that can improve the game or something?
Well, I mean, given that, in the games industry, we've had, computer-controlled bots, as we call them, for a very long time, definitely you can use them for that, for sure. Yes.
Please, any question? Discussion? So, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much.
Thank you for
Yes. Prosím? Jo. Nevidíte si. Půjdeme si tam tady do toho velký otevřený dole v přízemí, my jsme tam byli včera, bylo to docela fajn. Já jsem přemýšlel, že některý menzi třeba nejdu